What is good, everybody? Welcome back to another episode brought to you by the League FFB. Today, we are going to be doing our quarterback free agent preview for the upcoming free agent class here during the 2024 offseason. And last offseason, when we did this video, it was one of my favorite videos that we made at the beginning of this channel. And two, we were able to successfully predict Baker Mayfield to the Bucks, Jimmy Garoppolo to the Raiders, and Derek Carr to the New Orleans Saints. So we had a very good quarterback prediction video last year. We're going to try and keep that up this year. I have 5 quarterbacks here for the 2024 free agent class, but without wasting any more time, why don't we just hop into this video and talk a little bit about this free agent quarterback class. Now, you might be asking yourself, Andrew, why does this matter for Dynasty Fantasy Football? This is a fantasy football channel, and I'm here to tell you that if we can find value, if we can project what is going to happen in the NFL landscape this offseason, that is going to give us an edge over our competition in our Dynasty Fantasy Football leagues. And I think if you can weigh through some of these variables that can happen over the course of the offseason, doesn't matter if you play in a very deep league or a shallow league, you're going to be able to project a range of outcomes. And if we can do that, we can find value at these positions. For example, one of the guys we are going to be talking about today is Ryan Tannehill. And if you can buy Ryan Tannehill cheap now while people aren't thinking about it, if you like those ranges of outcomes and you think they're going to improve his value in the next couple of months, you buy him cheap now, you wait until these things happen, the dominoes fall into place, and then at that point, when everybody else in your league catches up, that is when you can capitalize on that and sell Ryan Tannehill for a value bump. And finding these value bumps and stacking these value bumps over the course of an offseason is going to make the difference in the depth of your roster, which is going to help you in season when those injuries pile up, and that will give you a little bit of a better bench than everybody else in your league. So that is kind of the long explanation for why this matters. So without wasting any more time, let's hop right in and let's talk about the potential teams that could be in the free agent quarterback market. And now we're looking at a list of teams, and the reality is most teams in the NFL most likely could be in the range of outcomes for a potential free agent. But I think these teams right here, there's 12 teams on this list. These teams are going to be the most likely teams to be in this free agent market. You see teams in here like the Washington Commanders, the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, Houston Texans, New England Patriots. Obviously, these teams are either looking for a starting quarterback or looking for a quarterback that can help compete with the starter. And then even as we get down a little bit further, you see teams like the New York Jets and the New Orleans Saints who do have their starting quarterbacks in Aaron Rodgers and Derek Carr, but they're most likely going to be looking for depth pieces at the quarterback position going into 2024. So this is really the list of the teams. You guys can kind of look at that yourself. But what I see here is a couple teams that are probably not going to be in the market. Yes, they could, but they probably won't be. Those being the Washington Commanders, the New England Patriots, the Chicago Bears, and the New Orleans Saints. Obviously, the Patriots, the Bears, the Commanders, they have the top 3 picks in the NFL draft. We expect those teams to be in the running for Caleb Williams, Drake May, Jaden Daniels. So I'm just going to take them out of the free agent market here. And I do think that the Saints need to be removed from this because as we look over at Spotrac, I'm looking at team salary caps. The New Orleans Saints currently rank 32nd in the NFL in current cap space. They're currently $81.9 million over the cap right now. Can't imagine they're going to be paying a free agent quarterback much money or will be able to pay one much money. So I just think I want to remove them out of this list. So what does that really leave us with? That's going to leave us with a real market of the Atlanta Falcons, the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, the Tennessee Titans, the Pittsburgh Steelers, the Seattle Seahawks, the Minnesota Vikings, the Las Vegas Raiders, and the New York Jets. So without further ado, let's talk about the most highly coveted free agent quarterback in this market. That is going to be Kirk Cousins of the Minnesota Vikings. And you see right now over on Spotrac, he is projected a calculated market value of $39.3 million. That's his average annual salary. They are saying that market value is going to be about 3 years, $118 million. That will put him about the 11th highest paid quarterback in the NFL. So that's kind of what we're looking at right now. You see his current contract, he's averaging about $35 million. So a little bit of a pay upgrade, but really not much for Kirk Cousins. There are some comparable contracts to this. We saw the Matthew Stafford contract. We saw the Russell Wilson contract, the Geno Smith, the Aaron Rodgers. All of these contracts are going to be comparable. So you ask me, hey, what is my prediction for Kirk Cousins this year? Well, it sounds a little bit boring, but I do think that the most likely scenario is that Kirk Cousins falls back with the Minnesota Vikings. This is a team that, yes, they have the 11th pick pick in the NFL draft, but I just don't think that they are going to be willing to move on from Kirk Cousins, assuming that he wants to play for a price tag similar to this. Obviously, cap is an issue at times for Minnesota. Right now, they have about $28 million in cap space, but that can obviously fluctuate from now and the time that the NFL free agent period comes around. So he is going to have to be a little bit team friendly for the Minnesota Vikings, but I just don't see a scenario where Kirk Cousins isn't back. I guess the only scenario would be if they fully decide to move on and go the rookie quarterback route at pick 11, or potentially trade up in the NFL draft. But I think the most likely scenario and the prediction that I am going to make is he remains a Minnesota Viking and he signs a short-term deal, 2 to 3 years at about this price, and stays in Minnesota. But then you think, what is the second best option? What is the option that could potentially happen if Minnesota does try to move on from Kirk Cousins? And I think the Atlanta Falcons make the most sense here. This is a team that is most likely a quarterback away. You look at what they did last season in their division. Obviously, new head coach in town, no longer Arthur Smith. They finished with a 7-10 record in 2023, just 2 games behind first place in that division. I think if you insert Kirk Cousins to this team, this is a team that is most likely going to be a favorite to win the division. You pair Kirk Cousins with Drake London, Kyle Pitts, Bijan Robinson, and a very good offensive line. It is going to be good things for the Atlanta Falcons. And I think this is a team that is going to be highly interested in signing one of the top free agents here in 2024. And as far as salary cap goes, they have about $30 million in cap space right now. So they're going to be able to add a little bit more to that cap space number as the offseason progresses. But this seems like a second best option for Kirk Cousins if the Minnesota Vikings decide to move on from him. Now, moving on to the second projected quarterback in this market, that is going to be Baker Mayfield for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, currently projected $27.1 million as an average annual salary in his current market value. They're thinking about 4 years for $108 million. I think that's a little bit of a longer extension than I think Baker Mayfield is going to get, but I do think that Baker Mayfield is going to get about this type of money. You saw what he did with the Buccaneers last year. They went out, they won the division, they won a playoff game under Baker Mayfield, and now he has likely earned this extension. There are some comparable contracts to this, and the list of players actually isn't that great. You see the names of Daniel Jones, Derek Carr, Geno Smith, Jimmy Garoppolo. Nobody is really excited about those names. And I can't say that anybody who has signed those contracts, I don't know if any of those teams are happy that they did sign their quarterbacks to those contracts. That could be in the range of outcomes here for Baker Mayfield, but I do think that the most likely scenario and my prediction for where Baker Mayfield plays in 2024 is he gets that contract extension with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Just makes the most sense. He played well. They have a lot of cap space. Currently 11th in available cap space in the NFL. They have about $41 million. I don't see why they wouldn't re-sign Baker Mayfield. They're not a team that is going to have the ability to go up and get a quarterback in the NFL draft. So they're likely going to be stuck with a guy who did play well. And I'm saying stuck. Don't take that as a negative thing. I think Baker Mayfield played well. This is the type of contract that is going to get some scrutiny. I'm sure this offseason he's probably going to sign similar to those contracts that we talked about before. And I'm sure that there's going to be some Buccaneers fans and some NFL fans that are going to say, man, the Tampa Bay Buccaneers will regret that contract. But I do think this is the most likely scenario for Baker Mayfield. And I think that's why he will be a Tampa Bay Buccaneer. But again, we're talking about what is the second best option here, and I can't get away from the Atlanta Falcons. I said that they're going to be aggressive in the free agent market. If they miss out on Kirk Cousins goes back to Minnesota, they might get really aggressive over Baker Mayfield, and they might pay him to come in and be their quarterback of the future here in Atlanta, and that just might be something worth exploring if you are Baker Mayfield, if they're willing to pay you some extra money to come over there. I know that the Atlanta Falcons currently have the 8th overall pick in the NFL draft. I don't know if they're going to have a good enough quarterback on the board to be willing to pull the trigger at that point. I think the big 3, Jaden Daniels, Drake May, Caleb Williams, all of those guys will be off the board by 8. So they're going to either have to trade up and get aggressive, or they're going to have to fall back on a free agent. And I think Kirk Cousins and Baker Mayfield are going to be their top 2 priorities. This is the second most likely scenario for Baker Mayfield. Now, moving on to the third quarterback in this free agent class, we are going to be talking about a guy who got a little bit of buzz last year, the Pastronaut himself, Joshua Dobbs. And right now he has the 3rd highest calculated market value according to Spotrac. They're thinking about $6.7 million as an average annual salary, thinking a 1-year deal. Obviously, there isn't a bunch of great free agent quarterbacks outside of those top 2. That's why I do think that Atlanta will get aggressive for those guys. But Joshua Dobbs here, he is coming off of a 2023 season where he played played good in spurts for the Cardinals and for the Minnesota Vikings. Obviously didn't finish the season for the Vikings as the starting quarterback. That was Nick Mullins. But there is some comparable one-year deals that people were willing to give guys a chance. Baker Mayfield, Taylor Heineke, Teddy Bridgewater, Jacoby Brissett. These are the names. I think Baker Mayfield being one of the few that had paid off. Maybe a Taylor Heineke paid off as well if you look at it that way. Not really sure. But I do think when we look at potential landing spots for Joshua Dobbs, obviously Dobbs is not a guy you are going to be signing to come in and be your starter off of the rip. I think this is a guy who's most likely going to be added in as depth, potentially a guy who could be a motivator for the current starter. I think of teams right now, and my prediction for where Joshua Dobbs is going to land is the Tennessee Titans. If they want to bring Joshua Dobbs in and have him kind of compete with Will Levis in camp, kind of give him that extra motivation, say, hey, we have an emergency plan for you if you don't pan out. I think that is the most likely scenario. This is a team too that could be looking for a bridge quarterback if they don't like what they get in Will Levis in year 2. Now, I fully expect them to go with Will Levis as the starter for the majority of the season. And I will say I do expect Will Levis to remain the starter for the majority of the season because I just don't think that Joshua Dobbs is that great of an NFL quarterback. He is a good backup for your NFL teams. And I think that's what they're paying for here in Tennessee. A guy that they could potentially see what he has if all hell breaks loose for the Titans and Will Levis. Now we move on to the second best option for Joshua Dobbs. And again, we're kind of keeping the same theme here. What team has a questionable starter that could look at Joshua Dobbs as a motivator or a potential bridge guy? I think the Las Vegas Raiders could use Joshua Dobbs. Maybe push Aiden O'Connell. They currently have a top 15 pick in the NFL draft. But just like I said with the Atlanta Falcons, who are at 8, I don't expect them to be able to get one of the rookie quarterbacks that they want unless they are willing to take a shot on a JJ McCarthy or a Bo Nick. But even then, I don't know why they would do that. I think it is the most likely scenario that they go defense, keep adding to that defense, build that team that Antonio Pierce wants to build, and get you another guy. Because Aiden O'Connell showed you enough in his rookie year that you could potentially go out with him year 2 and see what happens. But I think getting that insurance at the quarterback position and Joshua Dobbs behind him gives you a little bit of flexibility come the middle of the season if Aiden O'Connell isn't playing well. So these are my 2 most likely scenarios for Joshua Dobbs, but I do think that fit in Tennessee makes a ton of sense for him from an NFL standpoint. Now moving on to our next quarterback, it is going to be Gardner Minshew, quarterback of the Indianapolis Colts. And this is a guy who played really well in Anthony Richardson's absence this year. He did make a Pro Bowl for whatever that's worth. We're not really sure these days, but he did make a Pro Bowl. And despite Anthony Richardson pretty much missing the entirety of the year, he did help the Indianapolis Colts get 9 wins. So they did get a winning record in 2023. So I guess you can hang your hat on that if you're Gardner Minshew. He is projected right now $5.3 million. They're thinking something like a 2-year deal, $10 million. It's going to put him somewhere in the range of guys like Baker Mayfield, Teddy Bridgewater, Mitchell Trubisky, Jacoby Brissett, similar to the Joshua Dobbs contract. Now, if you ask me, this is where I don't agree with Spotrac. I do think that Gardner Minshew earned more money than what Joshua Dobbs would earn. Not really sure why Joshua Dobbs is projected more money, but I guess maybe because it is a 1-year deal and this is a 2-year deal for Minshew. So I guess that could be put in there as a little stipulation to why he is projected that much. And if you live in the Atlanta area, close your eyes because he is most likely to be an Atlanta Falcon. Now, this might be worst case scenario for you in Atlanta this year. I'm not going to lie. And that's not me kind of poo-pooing on what Gardner Minshew is as a quarterback. But if you go out there, you don't land one of the top 3 rookies, you don't land one of the top free agents in Baker Mayfield and Kirk Cousins because they go back to those teams that are currently rostering them, I think your next best option is going to be Gardner Minshew. And if you sign Gardner Minshew as a bridge quarterback, yes, I think he is going to be better than what Taylor Heineke and Desmond Ridder gave you in 2024. And you are most likely looking at a guy who is a stopgap kind of quarterback, a guy that you can play for 1 or 2 years, but he's really not going to give you too much. I think for Gardner Minshew in a dynasty fantasy football lens would be very good because Gardner Minshew would obviously be the starter. He would have weapons like Drake London, Kyle Pitts, Bijan Robinson, a good offensive line. So if you have Gardner Minshew on your teams, yes, that could be very good for you. You could probably get a pretty significant value bump. I can't imagine that there would be anybody willing to give you less than a 2nd round pick for Gardner Minshew. There might be a chance that you're going to get a 2025 1st round pick for Gardner Minshew if he lands here. If you do roster those receiving options of Kyle Pitts, of Drake London, maybe a slight bump from where they were at this year, but nothing significant, which is where I think most people want them to be in the dynasty fantasy football landscape. But I do think that this is a pretty good backup plan for the Atlanta Falcons if all hell breaks loose for them here in 2024. And yes, it may not be what what we want for the Atlanta Falcons, but it might be a likely reality for them here this offseason. Now, moving on to the second best case scenario for Gardner Minshew, that is going to be the Indianapolis Colts. I think it just makes a lot of sense for him to go back to Indianapolis. He proved enough as a backup. They have enough cap space that they could sign him as a backup. In fact, they have a ton of cap space to where they could sign him. They're not paying Anthony Richardson that big money yet. He is still on a rookie contract. Obviously, those rookie contracts for a top 3 quarterback in the NFL draft are a little bit expensive still, but they're not paying him that full quarterback money yet. So they can afford this. They are most likely going to have to pay an extension to Michael Pittman Jr. But overall, I do think that Gardner Minshew probably has found a home here in Indianapolis. So if he doesn't get some decent money to go be a starting quarterback somewhere else in the NFL, I could see Gardner Minshew coming back and being the backup again to Anthony Richardson here in Indianapolis. And now moving on to my final quarterback of this video, that is going to be Ryan Tannehill for the Tennessee Titans. And he is projected right now $4.9 million in that average annual salary. They're saying a 1-year prove-it deal for Ryan Tannehill. And I think that's very fair based on the season that he had in 2023, where he was benched for Will Levis, which I don't think many were surprised after they picked him early in the second round. I think we knew the days of Ryan Tannehill were likely limited in Tennessee, but he moves on here. He's going to be a free agent. And I think that there are very few teams that will likely be wanting Ryan Tannehill to come in and be a starter. But there is one team in particular that I do think could use him as a starter, and it makes a ton of sense for him to go join this team. That team is going to be the Pittsburgh Steelers. And the reason why this makes a ton of sense is obviously they have not been getting the play that they've wanted out of their quarterbacks this year. We've already heard rumors of them wanting to bring in competition for Kenny Pickett and potentially push him as either the starter or the backup of this team moving forward. And the reason why I think Ryan Tannehill makes a ton of sense for this roster is he's not going to cost them a lot of money. They don't have a lot of cap space right now. In fact, they're going to have to open up some cap space if they want to sign Ryan Tannehill. But I do think that the reunion with Arthur Smith here as the offensive coordinator now in Pittsburgh, and the reuniting of him and Ryan Tannehill when they spent time together in Tennessee, it just makes sense from a relationship standpoint. We could argue that under Arthur Smith in Tennessee, that is when Ryan Tannehill had the best years of his career. And although those years may be behind Ryan Tannehill, it may be worth exploring that type of magic again here in Pittsburgh, especially a team that needs some quarterback help moving forward. At a discount, that type of relationship is going to be worth its weight in gold. I think adding him to the Pittsburgh Steelers makes a ton of sense for a team that thinks that they can continue pushing for playoff games moving forward. And now, if Ryan Tannehill does not land with the Pittsburgh Steelers, what is his second best case scenario for him? I don't know if there is a second best case scenario for Ryan Tannehill, but I would say that the one that makes the most sense would be going to the New York Giants. This is a team who obviously paid Daniel Jones a buttload of money last year. They did have Tommy DeVito step in as the backup this year, and I think Tommy DeVito played well at times. He was probably more of an internet sensation than he was actually a good NFL quarterback, because despite how much we heard about Tommy DeVito, he still only won 6 games at the NFL level, and the New York Giants are still picking 6th overall in the NFL draft. Now, we don't expect the New York Giants to go for a quarterback in this year's class, so they could bring in some additional quarterback help. Ryan Tannehill, I think a veteran makes sense. They are going to be losing Tyrod Taylor, who is a free agent this offseason as well. We're obviously not going to be talking about him in this video, but I think Ryan Tannehill playing with Daniel Jones, that gives you a little bit of flexibility, similar to the situation that I talked about with Joshua Dobbs, where you bring him in kind of to bring the best out of the current starter or eventually take over from the current starter if all hell breaks loose. And I think that would be the most likely chance that Ryan Tannehill could get at starting reps in 2024 if he went to the New York Giants. And like I said, he's not going to be a very expensive free agent. The New York Giants have enough money to go out and get him. And I do think that they have a lot of holes to fill on this team. Ryan Tannehill is by no means going to make them a contending roster, but we know the most important position in the NFL is the quarterback, and they do have to figure that out some way or another and decide if Daniel Jones is their quarterback of the future. Bringing in Ryan Tannehill could push and motivate Daniel Jones. Now, that is all I have for you guys today. I am going to be doing this type of video for every positional group this offseason, so keep an eye out for those videos. They are going to be coming out very soon. Also, very excited for the NFL Combine. More content coming out regarding that. But if you guys did like this video, do me the favor, hit that like button. It is the best free way to show our channel some support, and it really does help us out in the YouTube algorithm. If this is your first time watching us over here at the League FFB, make sure you are subscribed to this channel. Maybe even if it's not your first time watching us, make sure you're subscribed to this channel. Make sure you hit that notification bell so you never miss a future video. And last but not least, make sure you are signed up for our free Discord. That is going to be linked in the description. If you play Dynasty Fantasy Football, we are helping you out with those teams 24/7, 365, all off season long, making you a better Dynasty Fantasy Football player. And not only that, you are joining a community full of like-minded people who are going to help you get better at this game. So like I said, join that free Discord. It is linked in the description. And with all that being said, I will see you guys on our next video. But until then, peace out.